Yang Gang Roundtable. It is Friday, June 26th, 2020. We're very fortunate to have both Reverend Wendy Hamilton and Quintus Jett with us today. Wendy Hamilton, I have followed you for a long time on Twitter, and I always appreciated your unique perspective. You know, you bring like the Yang policies come from kind of a different place with you, a faith-based place, which is rare and valuable, and I'm very happy to have you on the show to talk about that. And also Dr. Quintus Jett, who I have just today met. Thank you so much for joining us. I'd like to let you guys introduce yourselves in turn. Should we start with you, Reverend Wendy Hamilton?
Sure, that's fine. And you can call me Rev Wendy for short. Just,
okay.
Just don't call me late for dinner and we'll be fine. But my name is Reverend Wendy Hamilton. I am in Washington, D.C. I'm originally from Ohio. I am a minister. I most recently pastored a church here locally just outside D.C., the Open Door Metropolitan Community Church. I also do community activism. I work with truancy students, and I most recently was the director of spiritual and cultural outreach for the Andew Yang campaign, and still work as an advisor to the campaign and to Humanity Forward.
Great to hear. And Dr. Quintus Jett.
Former president of Abundance for America, one of the super PACs devoted to Andew Yang, background as a management professor who has a very much a lot of attachment to issues of faith. So that's why I'm really excited just to sit here and listen to Reverend Wendy today. Fantastic.
Man, let's just think about faith to start as a really broad societal concept, not even tied to religion, right? Mm-hmm. We have a crisis of faith in our institutions at the moment, and I'd say it's unfortunately deserved. Our institutions are pretty corrupt. They're not serving us, by and large, and we're having this societal crisis in America right now. Mm-hmm. So glad we could have you guys both on, because you have a different, you're in a different perspective on than a lot of other people we often have on, but we're all basic income advocates. Mm-hmm. So why don't we talk about that? Where should we start with this conversation? Anybody? No one's introduced themselves other than you guys. So we got Faye, Jeremy, and both Fays.
I'd love to lead off with a question for Reverend Wendy.
Sure.
So I have a question, which is, feels like religion and politics are forced to be somehow separate in our society, because churches lose some sort of status, tax-exempt status, if they try to participate in politics. But there seem to be a lot of very political sort of leaning churches, and I'm wondering why like Democrats don't find a way to mobilize people through the moral case for doing the right thing. I feel like, the right has somehow cornered that, and I don't know why.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good question. Thank you for asking. And I wanted to, just before I get to the answer, Shell, you mentioned that, faith in terms of people losing faith in institutions. And I would say that, yes, there is a broad swath of the electorate that probably can identify with that. I wouldn't say everybody is identifying with that, but I would, offer that faith is not just about having faith in a particular religion or a particular, spiritual tradition, but it also involves having faith in our leadership and having faith in our government, to represent us and to do the right thing. And so that brings me to Faye and this concept of the right thing. Because there are different definitions, even across spiritual traditions and faith traditions, of what the right thing is. And when you speak about the Democrats versus the Republicans in terms of how they present faith issues and how they navigate faith issues, even in their spiritual institutions, I would say that the Democrats actually there is a moral left. We just, our message maybe is not resonating in the same way that the moral right is. And so there's been a movement in this country, if you are familiar at all with Reverend Dr. William Barber and the Poor People's Campaign, he is basically putting in the work and promoting the ideas, because what I would say to you is that the concept of faith, religion, spirituality from a democratic or left-leaning perspective is rooted in social justice. It's rooted in looking out for the poor and the least of these and the widowed and those who have no voice and can't, cannot speak for themselves. So there are plenty of people amplifying that message. However, it is getting drowned out in many ways by those who feel like they have a more moral high ground. And there is no such thing as a more moral high ground. There's just moral ground. It is based on how you view morality. And so that's a conversation that's going back and forth. While I don't necessarily agree that churches should be advocating directly for spiritual and religious freedoms and things of that nature, because I do respect the separation of church and state. However, I also recognize that there is just a direct link when it comes to spiritual principles and political principles. That's part of what brought me to the Andew Yang campaign, because what he's talking about is social justice. And what he's talking about is looking out for humanity and taking care of each other and doing things in the way that we used to do them as a country, the principles that we were founded upon. When I discovered him, it was February of 2018. Okay, so I'm OG Yang Gang. I was there from the beginning. I'm OG YG. And I happened to read an article in the New York Times in February 2018 called "The Robots Are Coming." And it was introducing this young Asian gentleman who had just put his name in the hat for the 2020 Democratic presidential nomination. Now, mind you, this is 2018, right? So I'm still, sort of reeling from 2016. I'm like, 2020, like, who's even thinking about that right now? I'm still in shock with what's going on here. But at the same time, as I began to read the article and he started talking about the threats of automation, he started talking about, why Trump was actually elected, the real reasons that got him there, the job losses that occurred across the Midwest, and people feeling like they're unheard. And so I'm reading this and I'm like, wait a minute, I'm kind of liking what this guy is saying. And then he started, talking about tangible ways to address some of these issues, not just pie in the sky ideas, not just things that you put out there that have no hope of getting through Congress, but he was talking about helping people, and specifically with the universal basic income and putting $1,000 a month in people's hands. And so I started thinking about my upbringing in small town Ohio, where my grandmother and my grandfather worked for the shoe factory and the atomic plant. And back in those days, I'm gonna tell on myself, but in the late 70s, my age, when I was growing up, if you made $18, $19 an hour, you were living pretty well. You were relatively middle class in those days. And so we were doing pretty good there. But when those jobs started getting automated away, when they started getting shipped overseas, there was nothing that came in comparable to replace them. And so our small town fell into despair. And there was no job training, retraining programs, because, my grandfather went straight from high school right into the factories. So there was no option for him to now suddenly at, 60 or 55 years old want to go learn coding. Like, really? No, that, he wasn't in a position to do that. And so there was a lot of struggle and a lot of despair and depression. And I started thinking about, as I'm reading this article introducing Andrew, that what if they had $1,000 a month, though, to tide them over until they could, make decisions on what their next move would be and how much of an impact that would have made in their lives. And when I said that, I said, he's offering a tangible solution. I don't know who this dude is, but I'm with him. I want to help him spread this message, because this is spiritual. This is talking about looking out for people who are hurting, looking out for people who can't provide for themselves, and doing something for them, not because they earned it per se. It's because they are entitled to it based on their birthright. And that, in my estimation, is spiritual and faith-based. And I signed on right away.
Yeah. I mean, just to have faith that another person has value is kind of fundamental to society, right? When you look at a person, You don't want to go like, oh, I don't know if they're any good or not. Like, of course, people have value inherent. That's like the strength of us as a species. We survive because we care about each other. That's the only way. An individual human is not very great by themselves. And if we don't care about strangers, society just breaks down.
It doesn't seem to be obvious, though, Shale. The way that you say it's like it's obvious, but where I live, it doesn't seem to be obvious.
It's counterintuitive in our current American culture. It is not obvious. It wasn't taught to me to be obvious. It's something I, figure it out.
Well, in fact, that's actually something that I wanted to ask the Reverend about, which is Christianity seems to be saying that that all people are born sinners. And so does that create sort of, it's very opposite to how Chinese people have been taught in Confucianism, is that all people are born an empty slate and generally good. And you have to, teach them to go in the right direction. I think the teaching to go in the right direction is also there in Christianity, but there's sort of this, everybody just starts out as already sullied or somehow,
if that is your particular interpretation of Christianity. So I want you to be clear that there are various interpretations and various descriptions of Christianity. That particular tenet is held and more readily found in your evangelical and more fundamental understandings of Christianity, but that is not across the board. And that's the thing about Christianity that some people don't understand, and particularly those who would give the impression somehow that their interpretation of who Jesus is and what Jesus stood for is the only one. To put yourself in a position to suggest that says that you don't know much about Christianity and how the religion itself, was cultivated, how it came about, and what the general tenets of it were. And so I don't want to get into a religious debate about that, but I want you to be clear that, the religion in and of itself is subject to interpretation, and no one has the corner market on how it is defined.
That's true, but the question is, how do we speak to those people who really are in the evangelical group, which is a lot of people in my area. I live in rural East Texas. And so where I am, this is I'm getting a lot of the prevailing, the information from my local churches, which I attend with all of my friends.
Right. Well, let me say this to you, that one of the things that transcends even religion is money and need and lack thereof. And so what I have found is we may not necessarily agree on positions within the scripture, but where are the areas that we can agree? And let me talk to you about those things, because at the end of the day, it's not our job to convert anybody else. It's our job to live out a model of life that we, aspire to live before them. If they have questions about why you seem to be, in a place that you are, feel free to answer them. But this idea somehow that I have to necessarily convert somebody over to my way of thinking never works out. What we can do is find the areas, where we can agree, and let's do some work on those. That's why I believe so strongly in UBI, because I posted earlier today. So I have been pastoring a small country church here outside of DC, and we were going through, a lot of churches are experiencing, membership decline and attendance decline just across the board, because even the numbers in terms of religious believers is going down. So that's, that's a whole nother conversation. But my small church, when the pandemic hit, that did not help where we already were, and so we made the tough decision that we were going to have to close this church. I'd only been with them for a couple of years, but that's where we've landed and what we've decided to do. But in the midst of doing that, that doesn't change the mission and the fact that if perhaps my members had UBI, and perhaps I had UBI, then we would be able to continue the work and maybe for a little bit longer until we figured out something to do. There are evangelical churches having the same conversation. So you can go into them talking about these principles from the standpoint of, I may not agree with your position or your work, but what you can agree on is that you could use some more money to keep it going, can you not? And that's where you begin to have the conversations, because once you find a place of connection, people begin to build up trust with you, and then they're open to hearing more about you. But if I don't know and you don't know me, I'm not automatically going to invite you to share your ideas or be open to those until I've made some measure of connection with you. So let me find a place to connect, and then the other stuff we can get to later.
Wendy, I really think you hit the nail on the head, by the way. This is Ariel here. And I think that's how Yang courted so many former Trump supporters, which I am one of them, because the Democrats kept going, like, especially, what's his name? Like, you know, the Democratic Party was like, you don't want to vote for Hillary because you're racist and you're bad. And then if you're struggling financially, discrimination or people being discriminated against is the last thing on your mind when you're thinking, what is my where am I going to get my next paycheck from? Discrimination is the last thing on your mind. So when Yang came in and he says, hey, hang on, I know why you guys voted for Trump, because he spoke to your problems, but his solutions were messed up and he didn't have the right solutions. I jumped on Yang Gang like in a heartbeat. And I was just amazed that in 2016, the Democrats just shunned so many people who are suffering financially in this country and just pinned the voting for Trump on discrimination rather than thinking about the least of these. You know?
Well, what I'll say to that is that I would not necessarily just say it was the Democrats, because it really is about reading the moment and reading the time and reading the electorate. And so in that regard, I would say the Democrats probably misread the time and what's happening, because I think the atmosphere and the time calls forth the candidate. Does that make sense? And so I feel like because the Democrats missed it, and Trump in his own way was endeavoring to speak to a larger issue, that was the issue people were more focused on at the time, and therefore he became the candidate. Andrew came with a message this time. The advantage, of course, that Trump had was that he was already well known. He already had a presence, you know, he already had a following, and so people understood who he was. Andrew had a dynamic message, still does, but nobody knew who he was 2 years ago. You know, we started out in some very small places talking to people, and, you know, even a year later, it was kind of like, what's his name again? What you call him? You know, so we had to spend a lot of time just, you know, introducing people to who he was, you know, in order to get them to listen to his message. I knew he had the message day one. I knew that he had the message. And so me being in, you know, the spiritual and the faith community, wanted to be someone who went into some of these communities. I used to be in the evangelical community. That's why I can speak, because, you know, my theology has evolved and is much more progressive now, but I was there. So I know that thinking. I was there for many years. So I know that thinking. And as a matter of fact, what I see myself as is a bridge to both communities, where I can go in and I can speak the language of the evangelical from a progressive standpoint and share with them where there are points of connection and where that, you know, according to the faith that we claim to follow, we can join together to get problems solved for humanity.
And Wendy, why do you think, like, the media industrial complex and the DNC constantly gave him the least amount of time to speak, constantly got his name wrong, constantly, you know, got a picture of him wrong? It just seemed that at a certain point, it just became deliberate. It's like they wanted to keep his name recognition low.
I mean, it may have seemed like that. I don't believe that it was a coordinated effort at the end of the day. And I've been in politics too for a while. And the reality is much of what they do is about ratings. And ratings is built on the narratives that you can create and the people that you can insert into those narratives. And at the time, they didn't know. And we also, what we don't understand, we fear. And so, or what we don't know, you know, we fear. So they didn't know who this Andew Yang guy was. You know what I'm saying? And they didn't know, should they take him seriously? Should they not? Is he just an internet thing? Because he doesn't seem, you know, to have any, you know, tangible support outside of Twitter and Facebook. And maybe this is just a mirage. And so we're not going to take him seriously until we have to. And so while I'm not excusing, some portions of what I do believe was a media blackout at some point, where they were just deliberately not including him in certain graphics and things like that. But at the same time, I also have to acknowledge that we were unknown, that we were wholly grassroots. We were doing everything we could in our power to get the media to invite Andrew to different events and to include his name. And we were certainly holding them accountable when they didn't. But I honestly think that for the most part, they just did not take us seriously or believe that we were much of a threat until now. I don't know if you all remember back. We also have to be honest, like that first debate was not the greatest for Andrew. That was the one he got maybe 2 minutes of speaking time.
Right.
But he also, the whole debate experience was new for him. And so the media, and I'm just telling you this from the behind the scenes, a lot of folks wrote him off after that. They were like, oh, he's not serious. He couldn't even speak up at the event. Never mind, they didn't ask him a lot of questions, but at the same time, they kind of pulled back on us like, okay, we're gonna chill and see where this goes. But what happened was the people powered campaign that we had that got him into the next debate, they started having to pay attention. You have to remember, there were 27 people running for the Democratic, now 27 when it first started out. Mm-hmm. So they had to also make up in their minds who was serious and who was not. And so it just took them a little longer than we needed to for them to catch on. But now he's a household name. So perhaps it was worth it.
And also I'd add, it's also there's issue of money, because in the year before the Iowa caucuses, the way that they decide and who they give attention to is how much money you raise. And so, if Yang had raised $10 million after the second quarter instead of the third, mm-hmm. he would have gotten more attention. But it just didn't. The fundraising didn't really kick in for real until like last summer.
Yeah, that's true, because that's another reason. That's another way that they deem you viable is how much money you're raising. Whether that means anything or not, because the Mike Bloombergs of the world, Tom Steyer, he came in with his billions and he knew that he was going to be kind of an underdog. He didn't get a lot of press either, other than the stuff that he bought with his own money, and so again, they make these decisions that, from a corporate standpoint that really aren't necessarily designed to blackball anybody in my estimation. But at the same time, they sometimes miss the opportunity to celebrate and elevate those who have demonstrated time and time again how serious they are. And now they're here on the back end. Andrew's everywhere. Everywhere you look, he's showing up on a podcast. He's showing up on The View. He's showing up, so now Stephen Colbert, Jon Stewart mentioned something the other night, like Yang Gang 2020, so he's everywhere now. So, it was their loss. It was their loss.
It's like you said, money is the great unifier. I was like, go on, Faye. I didn't mean to cut you off.
It's fine. Okay, so I want to talk about something like my family's doing in little old Washougal, Washington, tiny little town. They're very involved in their church, and my grandpa has collected a bunch of different people, different churches' information and the different kind of services that they put together. Like my grandpa works it's called Treasure House. It's just a thrift store, but like they collect food from Safeway that's expiring, and they give it to homeless families and stuff. I'm curious, do you know about other networks of churches that have these resources that are working together in order to help direct the people who need them? Do you know much about this at all?
Well, I would say that,
does that make sense what I'm saying?
It does. I would say that there are a number of churches, statewide, that's the work of the church. That also is social justice. That's what the church is ultimately about, feeding and providing for those who don't have enough. And so, like, for instance, the church where I was recently pastoring, we partnered with the local food bank. It was Montgomery County, Maryland. So it was like the Western Montgomery County Food Bank. And we would, take in donations, and then one of our church members every month, and we would take what we had over to the local food bank. And so I think that is a work that is going on locally all over the country. Those kind of works, unfortunately, are not the ones that get highlighted. Those those don't bring ratings, the good things that are happening. But if there's some kind of, crazy, person that, says some wild and outlandish thing at a sermon or something like that, that's going to be breaking news. And so unfortunately, we have to work to do these things and continue doing them behind the scenes.
Well, I guess what I'm curious about is, are there networks that exist that are already connecting these different churches? Because what I found out from him is people are double dipping, triple dipping from all these different resources, and the people who need it aren't actually getting it. Yeah, I mean, I met a guy here in San Diego, and he grabs, 7-8 bags of bagged food for his family and has to hike it back up, and so I'm just curious if you know about existing networks like that.
Well, not off the top of my head, but I could certainly look something up and send that to you, as I look for the information. But let me say too that these are also pretty desperate times, as we know. Yeah. And you say some people may be double dipping, and they very well may be, but there may be some that are in need of it, for whatever reasons. And so you're always going to have those folks. But yeah, I will, send you, I'll get your email information and find out, what networks that I can send to you to let you know where that's happening. But just know that it is happening. And there are a number of people who are doing it, and they're doing it for the right reasons.
To kind of piggyback on that, Rev Wendy, I guess, could you, kind of go into a little more depth of why it's important that the church plays the role of a social safety net versus the state?
Well, I think that both play a role. I don't think the two are mutually exclusive, but I will say that church programs can and tend to be much more accessible and effective in my estimation, because there's no means testing. I mean, at the end of the day, that's really the difference, is that the state's going to make you jump through hoops and the church is going to say, open your trunk. And
the difference is tremendous. It's a colossal difference, because 3/5 of applicants for welfare get nothing, right? Ridiculous.
So and not only and also, and this kind of goes back to what Faye was saying about double dipping, with the state, they also monitor and to a certain degree try to dictate how you utilize any resources that they provide for you. And if you don't use them, if you don't spend them in a particular way, if you don't adhere to the guidelines, you could be cut off, or you could get to a point where you are disqualified from a program simply because you made $10 on the side that they found out about. Yeah. And so for me, those types of programs are not life affirming. They are not empowering. And so that they all, they are sometimes can be discouraging spiritually and from a motivational standpoint. And so where the church is, and the foundation of the church has always been about not only providing for the least of these, but also very much about those having more, contributing so that those who didn't have any could take from that. So you see lots of scenes in Genesis and in the Old Testament where those who had more were willing, not forced, because of their spirit of giving, to bring their excess to the town square and dump it, and then those who had the least be able to come and partake of those excesses that others had.
That's so important, because it's like it's like if you don't have some kind of foundation down there, you're basically on quicksand. And then how can you pull somebody out of quicksand when you're in the quicksand yourself? You got to get a floor underneath you to pull those people out of the quicksand. So when the least of these keep getting less, everybody gets less. And then sometimes we have the most of these that if they get a little more, they can help out more. And that's like that's what a UBI is, and that's what I see it as.
Mm-hmm.
Wendy, Reverend Wendy, we have you. I want to ask you, you deal with a lot of intractable people, I'm sure, as a person with a nuanced political position, right? So I'm trying to do everything I can to get UBI. I'm trying to make connections with all kinds of different people from different parts of the political spectrum. And I saw, Mitt Romney saying some sort of vaguely pro UBI things, doing some encouraging things. So, I tweeted to him, like, hey, Mitt Romney, if you back a UBI, you got my support no matter what you do, we can work together, both sides of the aisle. And just my tweet to Mitt Romney, one of my friends who's a liberal, she's like, no, you can't work with Mitt Romney because he is against abortion and you cannot under any circumstances do anything with it. I'm like, well, we got to make hard choices, and like women who don't have money can't have abortions anyway. So it's already, this is the lesser of two evils in my mind. What do you think? And she just says, nah, that's a bad take. And that's like, it's like they won't discuss it anymore. So I wonder, do you have any rhetorical suggestions for what one does in that kind of a conversation? You must have been there many times.
Well, here's the thing. I don't necessarily look at anybody as intractable, because I don't expect anybody to view things exactly the way that I do. I don't expect for people to have to agree with the way that I see things. We can agree to disagree without being disagreeable. And we can look, as I said earlier, for things that we do have common ground on, because there are certain things that are considered my values. So if you are someone who says that you respect me and you respect my values, then you would never expect me to compromise my values simply because you want me to agree with you. I can respect where you stand without having to join you in that moment. I can recognize that this is a place where we'll never probably agree, but let's look for a place where we can. And so when someone such as a friend of yours comes to you and says, well, you can't work with Mitt Romney because he stands for this, thus, and so, why not? You weren't addressing Mitt Romney according to this, thus, and so. You were trying to work with him on a point where you saw connection and agreement, and you can do that without compromising your values. It makes me think about, and this is totally off topic, but anyway, it makes me think about when I was in seminary. So I went to Howard University. That's how I wound up in DC. I left Ohio, came to Howard University here in DC for undergrad, and then wound up going to divinity school there. And so as I mentioned earlier, I grew up in a when I went to church, started going to church right after college, the church I joined was pretty traditional, evangelical, Pentecostal, charismatic, run around the church, all the stuff that you can think of. I used to do all of that, and I found value and merit in that. But when I went to, so I had a very sort of rigid understanding of what Christianity was. Kind of talking, when I was talking to Faye earlier, and this kind of interpretation that I had bought into because I hadn't really grown up in church. So this was my only church experience. So I trusted the leaders I was going. But as I started doing my own research, it started to evolve. So I went to seminary, right? So I get to seminary, and one of the classes we had was world religion. And the world religion, professor, first of all, I had been taught, this is just me, socialized to believe that all other religions are inferior to Christianity, right? I'm sure if anybody's familiar, that they've said that, okay, Faye, thank you for testifying. I'm not by myself. So, we were taught that all other other than Christianity, it's not Christian, we don't know that Buddhist stuff. We don't know that Confucius dude. We don't know what he's talking about, so we were kind of discouraged from, exploring other religions. So I get to divinity school, which thank God it saved my life, my spiritual life, because it opened up my mind. And we had this world religions class, and they said, no, there are valid world religions. We're going to study all of them. If you're a seminarian, you're coming to study. And not only are you going to study them, you're going to go visit one of the services or churches that you're not used to. I said, okay, that's it. You're pushing me. It's one thing to study about someone else's way of thinking and way of worshiping, but don't you know I want to get struck by lightning if I go visit another. And one of the, but of course I came around, I wound up going to go visit a Sikh temple. But I'm saying this to say and the Sikhs are lovely people. Sikhism is a beautiful religion, very friendlier than some church people, but that's a whole nother sermon. But I remember the struggle that I had around the idea that I was actually going to go and visit and talk to these people who believe totally different than I did, and who I had been socialized to believe were so different, and something was wrong with them. And so I was crying to a friend on the phone saying, I got to go visit a Sikh temple and go talk to. And he said, Wendy, he didn't say go convert. He just said, go talk to people. Aren't you studying their religion? Like, don't you, I mean, aren't you a religion student? And that's a religion. So can't you go and have a conversation with them without feeling like you have to lay down all of your beliefs and where you stand and all of your values that you've learned just to go visit and have a conversation and reach out to somebody else? That doesn't make sense. If you are in a place where you feel like everybody has to think like you do, believe like you do, and worship like you do, what that says to me is you are a bit insecure in what it is that you really believe. Because if you were set in what you believe in and your values, you wouldn't have trouble talking to people who thought differently than you, or who believe differently than you. So I say that if a friend is trying to make you come over to their side and believe what they believe, their way or the highway, it's because probably they're not as rooted and grounded in their way as they'd like you to think that they are. And so your validating them will make them feel more comfortable. And I say that's not required.
Thank you. Yeah.
Amen to that.
I love what you just said. Yeah, because
Yeah,
I
amen.
go to every church. Anybody who asks me, and it might not be a church, it might be a mosque, it might be a meditation, a place to meditate that doesn't even talk about religion. It might be just a temple of some other type that is not, and I go to all of them. If somebody asks me to come join them, because in my local towns, this is the only way people socialize sometimes. They don't know any other way. And so, yeah, that's my son. He's playing Minecraft. But, I feel like that's something that we're not getting to do enough of, because we all sit in our group and we don't join the other groups very often, and we're terrified of them.
Right. And so that's that. And so back to Yang, because I'm always going to bring it back to Yang. That's in a sense what he represented. He represented this place where all people could come from different walks of life, from different, backgrounds, religions. I mean, as his spiritual advisor, I spent a lot of time, of course, talking to religious faith communities, particularly the Black church and Christian churches. But I also, talked to non-faith people, and we would be out there on the trail. We had a big, a faith town hall where Andrew got a chance to talk about where he stands in his own faith. And, the guy in the front row was atheist for Yang, and he was like, well, I want to be here too. And I said, well, I'm glad you're here. I want you to be here too, because it's not just about one. No particular faith tradition has the market on, and I'm not going to tell you that you as an atheist haven't found some sort of connection to Yang, that it is any less valid than those of us who have faith have found a faithful connection.
Were you involved in creating those values that became the Humanity First values? We had 6, and one of them was abundance. One of them was that's one of my favorites, and I think that's very Christian. And also the grace and forgiveness, right?
I would love to say that I was, but they were already there, and already being crafted when I got there. But again, it was another thing that drew me, because like you just said, those are spiritual principles. Grace, forgiveness, abundance, love, happiness, joy. Those are things that a person of faith or not of faith, these are just humane ways in which, we, have been created to interact with one another. And the message that Yang was, I tell people I was preaching the gospel of Yang, because what he was essentially trying to do was to sort of get us back to that very basic sense of who we were as human beings before all of this strife and division and you're this party and I'm this party and you're right and I'm wrong and you're left. It was not right. It was not left. It was forward.
That's what really spoke to me. And what I love about him the most, like Yang represents in some sorts like the data, the science, the technology, Silicon Valley type computers, kind of like, data and math. And then, but we've always seen that science, data, and math always want to butt heads with like faith, religion, and spirituality. But what's so wonderful about the Yang movement, you got science, logic, common sense, data, and math, and it meshes with spirituality and religion in such a positive way that they're actually coming together and not butting heads.
Right. Well, that too speaks to the type of man, Andrew is. And he's my friend, and I care about him and his family, but he is just an outstanding human being. I don't know, what other word I was, trying to seek, because if, as smart as he is and as much as he had happening, in him and all throughout the campaign, he remained humble. He walked in a level of humility that even he would be shocked sometimes at the responses that he would get. People coming up, I tattooed your face on my arm. It's like, I stayed up all night and I read all of your policies for 15 hours and didn't sleep for 3 days. So it's like, he'd be like, okay, great, and so all those were a little extreme. But then at the same time, you'll get a woman who will come up to him in tears and she'll say, thank you. My son has been in a depression for the last 2 years and has not come out of his room other than to eat or to maybe use the restroom or something. We could not reach him. And someone he found your website, someone yanged him. And I have not seen this spark of life in my son, in over 2 years. He's now feeling like he has a purpose and he has something to live for and he has something to connect to. That's spiritual. That's faith. People had faith in what Andrew was saying and in him as a person to not only say it, but to actually go forward and do it. And he's living that out now by, even though not attaining the office, he's still doing what he said he came to do. And I'll end this part with this. When he felt the sense to run, because for him, this was not just a vanity ego trip for him. He said, I didn't wake up one day and say, I think I want to run for president, because he's like, I'm not insane. But he knew that deeply he felt a sense of the need for him to run, of the time and the moment calling for him. And when he went to Evelyn to talk to her about running for the presidency and ask her permission, because it wasn't going to happen if Evelyn didn't say okay. After talking with him, she looked at him and she listened and she said, and Evelyn, by the way, is devoutly Christian. She said, you have to do this. Like, after she understood the UBI and he broke everything down to her, she said she looked at him and felt like this was much bigger than him and it was something that he needed to do. And so, of course, she would agree to support him in it because it was bigger than him.
So when
you see a leader with humility like that, it can really restore a person's faith.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Did it for me.
At least, I don't mean it makes them religious, but it can restore faith if they simply had a lack of faith in general, of things to be faithful in. When you see someone in a leadership position who could grandstand, like is traditional and expected in American culture today and on television everywhere we see, but instead humbles himself and says, no, I'm not any better than you. I am here as a leader only because I can get you what you want. I'm working for you. That is an inspiring thing, Yep. That reminded me of something that I'd forgotten about what leadership could be, I think a long time ago. I don't know when, but it's very inspiring.
Well,
so
I'd like to pivot to current events and find out what should we be following right now. What is the leadership right now? I love the Poor People's Campaign. I feel that they're the most Yang Gang aligned organization out there because they were also built on Martin Luther King's sort of principles, right?
Right.
So what can we be doing right now that you think is the most important to respond to all this police brutality that's going on, COVID-19? I mean, we're in a very unusual time.
Well, I think the first thing you can do is just make sure you're taking care of yourself, because at the end of the day, we can't be any good to any organization if we're not being good to ourselves and taking care of ourselves. And this is a lot. We are experiencing a lot. If you look at, the pandemic, that, caught all of us off guard, in terms of just the gravity of what we were facing. I mean, we kind of knew, but we didn't know, and then the economic fallout and the number of people who suddenly found themselves without a job, without an income, without a means to survive. I'm so grateful that, Andrew put forward the Humanity Forward, and we started giving out the $250 grants, and I was assisting with that. And I was just broken in tears listening to some of the stories, as I was calling people, or people were writing in their requests and saying, I can't get my medication, and I'm in my car with my daughter. And some of that is still going to be happening here because we're about to face the unemployment benefits ending here at the end of July. And some of these states that have had eviction moratoriums, they're about to lift those. And so some people that haven't gone back to work yet because the economy has not gotten back yet are going to lose their homes. And so my thing is take care of ourselves, but fill in where you fit in. The thing is, there are big national campaigns like the Poor People's Campaign is one that you pointed out. There's the ACLU is doing a lot of things. There's the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights is doing a lot of things. But there's also, it's really important to get involved locally, because sometimes we go and want to help with these national campaigns, but a lot of these national campaigns have local outreaches. And find out what's going on in our community, because we really are going to have to get back to the idea of taking care of our neighbors.
I also add, I want to add something. So, sure. I mean, a lot of people are entering the homeless realm for the first time in their lives. They're jumping into their cars the first time, but we are not prepared to even take on those people, because like I call myself nomadic, but I'm homeless. But it's by choice, right? But I tried to go to the bathroom in 2 different locations, a Denny's and a Starbucks, and I was not allowed to pee in them, right? And I was like, where did the homeless pee? They pee in the street, where that's going to make more toxins, that's going to make them more sick, and you are so close to entering into that realm. We should be creating frameworks where we have public showers that are available and porta potties that are available, and we don't have any of that. And I don't even know where to start with that.
Right, and that's why I'm saying find out locally, if that's happening, and if it's not. I know in some cities the Salvation Armies are providing showers and spaces for the homeless and meals. The Catholic charities and different organizations such as those are meeting these needs in different parts of the country. So I would start. That's why I say start locally, because what we see locally is ultimately going to play out nationally. And so if you are there, one way to take care of ourselves is to feel like we're doing something. You know what I'm saying? And so do something, even if it's making that phone call or going to visit the Salvation Army and making them aware, Faye, of the struggle and what's happening, and asking them, holding some of these organizations accountable to their missions, because a lot of these folks have put a lot of this stuff in their mission statements, but they either haven't fully lived into it, or they haven't been faced with the opportunity like they are now to actually step up and be and fulfill the mission that they say that they were created to do. So that would be my encouragement to you, Faye, is yes, look at some of the national programming, but most of those programs have a local branch, and we're going to have to take care of each other, because the size and the proportion of this program, if it's not addressed locally, is going to make it even more exacerbated nationally.
So we should probably say goodbye to everyone, but I also wanted to ask if Wendy, you might come back and talk with us again, because we could use you again. We need more Wendy here.
As long as my schedule permits, I'm happy to come back. I love all things Yang Gang. This is my family, and that's the thing I've also loved about it, because not only are we talking about getting back to the principles of humanity first, we're actually modeling them, for the most part for people. So we're not, even as supporters of Andew Yang, we're not just talking about it, we're actually being about it, and people are taking notice of that. We're living it out, we're modeling it for them, and people are noticing, and they say it all the time. You know, they would tell Andrew, man, you have some of the greatest supporters in the world. They're such nice people. I mean, even when I try to argue with them, sometimes they just smile at me and give me data. I don't, points. I don't know what to do with that. So yeah, I'd be happy to come back as my schedule permits and chit chat with you. But I do thank you all for having me today, and I hope that some of what I shared was helpful.
It was wonderful. Thank you so much. And Dr. Thank you so much, Wendy.
Do you
Thank you,
Wendy. Do you want to do your Twitter handle or something like that and let people know how to connect with you?
Yeah, so I'm at Rev Wendy 3 on Twitter. I also have a YouTube channel where I'm doing spirit talks. They're kind of like spiritual TED Talks. I do them every Sunday, and it's called the Community of Compassion. So you can find me on YouTube. Just look up Rev Wendy Hamilton or Community of Compassion, and you can follow me on Twitter. I have some other things, some other projects that I'm working on that I'll be announcing, down the road. But those are the two places you can definitely find me. I'm on Facebook, but not as much, and I go back and forth about how long I'm going to be on there. So Twitter are the places to be for now to find me. Thank you.
And Reverend Wendy, have you heard of the Compassion course online? It's built on. Okay, I'm trying to get Yang Gang to participate in that with me, and maybe we could have like a small group of people doing the Compassion course. It's a year-long course on nonviolent communication. I think it would be a great organizing tool. What do you think about that?
I agree. It's something to definitely look into. I am mindful that it is a year commitment, and some people don't know what's going to happen next week, so they may not be as open right now just because of the uncertainty that's happening. But I definitely think it's useful and something that we should consider down the road. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Have a good one.
Goodbye.
Thank you, Wendy.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.